All right, now that we've learned how to solve quadratics using the principle of zero products, then we can solve some applications. So we've gone over these steps before and they apply to any problem solving, so I don't think we'll go over them. But there's some good pointers here for you to look at. And there is a process. You want to familiarize yourself with the problem. And that means read it carefully, reread the problem, make sure you understand it. Then you're going to take the information and translate it into math. Then you're going to solve it, check in the original problem, and you're going to state your answer clearly. Now, checking in the original problem is important, even more important, because there are a lot of answers, mathematical, that don't work for the situation. So you have to look at that as well. Okay. Again, all of these things and probably a lot more things that are on here about how to become familiar with the problem. But whatever your process is, that's what you want to do. Okay, so the sum of a number and its square is 42. Find the numbers. Okay, well, the first thing I always do is this is what they want to know. So that's how I identify my variable. So I'm going to let x equal a number. Then I am going to translate all of this in the equation. Okay, so I know sum means I'm going to add. A number is going to be x. Its square means x to the second. Is means equal, and then of course 42 is just 42. Okay, so the translation of this, if I'm doing the sum of this is x plus x squared is equal to 42. Now it's important when you're doing quadratics, and this is a quadratic because you've got the squared term in there, but you want to put it in descending order. So this becomes x squared plus x is equal to 42. Now we learned in 5.6 this is not equal to 0, so I have to fix that. So that means excuse me, I'm going to subtract 42 from both sides, giving me x squared plus x minus 42 is equal to 0. Okay, so from here, I look at this and I think back on my steps for factoring. I always look for a greatest common factor. There isn't one, so I don't have to do anything with that. This is 3 terms and the leading coefficient is 1, which means I can use the process. I'm looking for 2 numbers whose product is negative 42, and those same 2 numbers, the sum is 1, remembering that this is an implied 1 here. Okay. Now, if we don't see it right off, then we can do our normal process of finding all the factor pairs of 42. One has to be negative and the other positive, and since the sum is positive, that means that the larger one is going to be positive. So I can have negative 1 times 42. If I add these, that equals 41, so that doesn't work. Negative 2 times 21, when I add these, that's 19, so that doesn't work. Negative 3 times 14, when I add those, that's 11, so that doesn't work. Negative 6 times 7, and when I add those, that equals 1, so this is the pair that I need. So negative 6 times 7, negative 6 plus 7, and they fit both conditions. So that means I can factor this into x minus 6 times x plus 7 is equal to 0. Okay, so from here, now I can use the principle of zero products. So I know if this times this equals 0, then x minus 6 is 0, or x plus 7 is equal to 0. Here, if I add 6 to both sides, I get x equals 6. If I subtract 7 here, I get x is equal to negative 7. So those are my 2 answers. Now I want to check and see if I've done the math correctly. But I want to go back up to my original equation. So I want to know if that plus that squared is equal to 42. If I'm dealing with 6, that gives me 6 plus 36 is 42, which is true, so that's a solution. I'm going to do the same thing with the negative 7. I want to know if that's equal to 42. Negative 7 plus negative 7 squared is equal to 42, so that's negative 7 plus 49, and that is equal to 42, so that one checks as well. So there are actually two, both solutions will work for this. So the numbers are 6 and negative 7. And there's my answer. Okay. All right, so the next one says that the product of two consecutive odd page numbers is 63. All right, so I'm going to have to go through this again. And I see that I have product. That means I am going to multiply. Oops, I'm sorry, you can't see that. Two consecutive odd page numbers. Okay, we may have to look this up again, but if I'm two consecutive page numbers, those are x and x plus 2. Is means equal, and of course 63 is just 63. So I have x times x plus 2 is equal to 63. Now I'm going to have a quadratic because x times x is going to be x squared, but the first thing I notice is this is not equal to 0. So I'm going to write this as x times x plus 2 minus 63 is equal to 0. When I distribute, I have x squared plus 2x minus 63 is equal to 0. Okay, so now it's a quadratic. It's equal to 0. So now I can look at how I'm supposed to factor it. Okay, look for the greatest common factor. There isn't one. So now I'm going to look for, since the leading coefficient is 1, I'm going to look for two numbers whose product is negative 63. The sum is 2. Okay, now we've discussed the process, but since we're doing this on a video, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what they are. So they are negative 7 and positive 9. Negative 7 and positive 9. So that gives me x minus 7 times x plus 9 is equal to 0. So now I have this factor times this factor equals 0, which tells me that x minus 7 equals 0 or x plus 9 equals 0. If I add 7 to both sides, I get x is 7. If I subtract 9 from both sides, I get x equals negative 9. I can cross this off because these are consecutive page numbers. Page numbers are not negative. So this solution to the equation is not a solution for the situation. Okay. So all I have to check is 7. So my check on that, if I have 7 times x plus 7, I want to know if that's equal to 63. So 7, oops, I did that wrong, times 7 plus 2 So this is 7 times 9, which is 63, so that works. Okay, so what does that tell us? This tells us that x is 7, but it says find the numbers. So if x is 7, then x plus 2 is equal to 7 plus 2, which is 9. So when I'm writing my answer, the numbers are, or the page numbers, are 7 and 9. And that's the answer. Okay. All right, the length of a rectangular garden is 6 feet more than the width. If the area is 160 square feet, find the dimensions. This means find the length and the width. Okay, so I'm just going to draw myself a diagram real quickly, and I'm going to figure out what I can do about finding the dimensions of this rectangle. It tells me that the area is 160 square feet. I know that length times width is equal to area. Okay, so I've got that the area is 160 square feet. And the other thing it tells me is that the length of the rectangle is 6 feet more than the width. So I know this is width times length, but I know that the length is the width plus 6. Okay. So, and I know that I multiply those together. So I have W times W plus 6 is equal to 160. The width times the length equals the area. Okay, once again, not equal to 0, so I have to fix that. W times W plus 6 minus 160 is equal to 0. Distribute, and I get W squared plus 6W minus 160 is equal to 0. So it's a quadratic, it's equal to 0. I'm ready to factor. Okay, I've got a leading coefficient of 1. There is no greatest common factor. So I'm looking for two numbers whose product is negative 160 and whose sum is 6. Well, and once again, if you need to break them all down, because there are a bunch of them, let's go ahead and do that. And the larger one has to be positive. So that's negative 1 times 160. That obviously doesn't work. Negative 2 times 80. That doesn't work. Negative 4 times 40. That doesn't work. Negative 5 times 32. That doesn't work. Negative negative 10 times 16. That's the one that works. When I add these together, that equals 6. So it's going to be negative 10 and 16, negative 10 and 16. So this becomes W minus 10 times W plus 16 is equal to 0. So I've got a factor times a factor that equals 0, which means one of the factors has to equal 0. So W minus 10 equals 0, or W plus 16 equals 0. If I add 10 to both sides, I get W equals 10. If I add 16, I get, or excuse me, subtract 16, I get W equals negative 16. Okay. This is a solution to an equation, but you can't have a negative length or a negative width. So length and width must be non-negative so you can throw it out. Okay, so of course I want to check. So I want to know if 10 times 10 plus 6 is equal to 160. 10 times 16 is 160, so this works. But now I have to find the length and the width. So I know that the width is 10 feet. The length is the width plus 6, which is 10 plus 6, which is 16, and that's also feet. And there's your answer. Okay, let's see if we can get one more done on this video. All right, the next one. The height of a triangular conference table is 2 feet less than the width. Oops, can't flip the page. Okay, if the area of the table is 24 square feet, find the width. Now it's only asking for the width on this one. So all I have to do is find the width. Okay. Well, if I've got a triangular table here, this is the width. Excuse me, and this is the height. And it tells me that the area is 24 square feet. Well, so now I have to know what the area is. Well, the area is equal to the width times the height divided by 2. And the width is what we want to know. Well, we know from the problem that the area is 24, and we know that the height is 2 feet less than the width, so that's the width minus 2. So I know that 24 is equal to the width times the height divided by 2. Okay. All right, now, we don't like fractions. I know we don't. So remember, I can multiply by the denominator. If I multiply this entire equation by 2, then that will clear the denominator. So 2 times 24 is equal to W times W minus 2 over 2 times 2 over 1. So that cancels out, and I'm now left with 48 is equal to W times W minus 2. Still not equal to 0. But that's okay. I can just write it as 0 equals W times W minus 2 minus 48. Okay, distribute. 0 equals W squared minus 2W minus 48. And we've seen this situation before. Okay, 48, again, we're looking for two numbers whose product is negative 48 and whose sum is negative 2. And they are positive 6 and negative 8, because the sum is negative. So positive 6 and negative 8. So I know this factors into W plus 6 times W minus 8. This factor times this factor equals 0. So W plus 6 equals 0, or W minus 8 equals 0. Here W is negative 6. Must be non-negative. Again, it's a solution to the equation, but not a solution to the real-life situation. And W equals 8. And that's all they wanted to know. So you can say the width is 8 feet. And you got it. Okay, I'm going to switch videos for the next one.